So some of you might know us as Ministry of Funny. We were YouTubers for a long time, creating comedy and satire about issues in Singapore, just funny things we saw on the street. You know, we make a lot of videos that talk about things like racism and how you should treat security guards and things like that. But that was our previous life, and we actually started enjoying the process of creating so much. We actually did our own TV series called She's a Terrorist and I Love Her. And it was a full 8-episode, 30-minute TV series, which we wrote, directed. You can see Haresh was the male lead in it as well. And we did the whole shebang. We had red carpets. We released it on an online platform around Asia. But we never strayed too far from social media. So as recent as just right before COVID, we did a tribute video to the one and only Nusir. And this, in case you're wondering what's going on in this picture, that's a picture of Nusir with the Singaporean crybabies, right? And the video is still online. You can go check it out on our channel, Ministry of Funny. and Nusir loved it, right? He loved it. Yeah, come on, you loved it. And because COVID happened, what happened during COVID? We couldn't make videos, we couldn't make TV shows. We pivoted and we went into podcasts. So we created a podcast called Yah Lah BUT. And why Yah Lah BUT? Because we always believe there's two sides to a story. You know, you read everything on the newspapers about one thing, you read everything on alternative news sites about another. What about everything in the middle? What happens in the middle? That's why we called it Yah Lah BUT, which for those of you not from Singapore, it means yes, but. And right now we're in at we do 3 episodes a week. We're at 590 episodes already. 4.5 million streams, 80,000 streams a month, 40,000 followers. And we have had luminaries like the Asian Spring Queen, Shanti Pereira. We've had presidential candidates, Singapore presidential candidates. We've had ministers on to come and talk about things that matter in Singapore. But so, I mean, for some of you, everyone here, you know, you're creators, you create short form video, but we create 1.5 hour-long podcasts 3 times a week. And why do we want to create podcasts? I think the big statistic is when we started podcasts, maybe there were 275 million listeners around the world. That number has now jumped to 505 million. And why do people want to listen to podcasts? Because of fake news, right? There's so much fake news out there. Everyone wants authenticity. And nothing beats being able to see how someone talks for an hour and a half, sitting opposite a table with opposite someone like myself. So we've seen ministers, we've seen, like I said, presidential candidates, we've seen celebrities, and that's what makes podcasts feel much more real. So some of you might be wondering, okay, how many people here have your own podcast already? Can you just see a show of hands? 1, 2. Oh, okay, so we really are. This is the target market. How do we do podcasts? You know, we went from short form video to TV series, and how do we do podcasts? Well, it's a simple answer. You just got to try it. This was one of our early attempts at podcasts in the middle of COVID. Both of us just at home over Zoom. That's Haresh just having a sip of water, me with a really bad haircut. But we decided, let's just jump right into it and show the world that we can recreate what we did with Ministry of Funny, what we did in TV series with a podcast as well. And now Haresh is going to tell you a little bit more about how.
Okay, cool. So I mean, what we are sharing here is stuff that we have learned. And, when we first started podcasts, we realized that, we did Ministry of Funny. We have a brand. People know us. But the first few episodes we released got maybe 80 listens. So we had about 180,000 followers on YouTube. So we went to podcasting. No one gave a damn. And then we were thinking, okay, how do we crack this? And then we realized one big thing is that if you want to do podcasts, it is very different from short form video, or at least that's what we feel. It is really the relationship you build with your listener. Of course, if you are from a big company, you have a huge budget, you want to create a podcast that's very highly edited with fancy music, that's one approach. But for us, we just wanted to have conversations and wanted to put it out in the world. We started off trying to appeal to what people were doing. We had a podcast version where it was guest-centric. We used to get guests on, but then it became dependent on their schedule. Then we realized, okay, let's just try talking about the news in Singapore and making fun of it, which doesn't really happen very often. And the people we were targeting were essentially ourselves. Like we wanted to create, like you hear this, you want to create something that you would listen to, that you would enjoy. So we realized by talking to one person, you actually find a niche that a lot of people can relate to. And for podcasts, one thing that we realized from doing YouTube, where we're doing one video a week, it is very tiring. And after a while, we did get burnt out. So when we started doing podcasting, we immediately thought, okay, what is the format that we can imagine doing 100 episodes of? So when we started off getting guests on, it was tough to schedule them, like I mentioned. We figured, okay, if it's just the two of us, we do this full time, there's no reason why we cannot continue doing this. So literally now we have 590 plus episodes. We started off once a week, and then we moved to twice, we moved to 3 times. And one big reason was the format we were doing, we actually really enjoyed it. I'm someone who gets pissed off by a lot of news, but I will never write a long Facebook post. I just like to complain, and I like to make jokes about it. So then we realized both of us like doing that. Can we do a format where it's actually fun? And I will say that recording videos for YouTube, it was very tiring, and I sometimes used to dread the shoot dates. But with podcasts, we do it 3 times a week, and we force ourselves to show up. We even have it in the first sentence of our intro, your thrice weekly podcast. So even if sometimes before recording, Terence and I have an argument, when we hit record, we have to go back and have that chemistry. So in some way now, we can't just skip out because we have committed to 3 times a week. And because we talk about news, there's news that happens every day. So our suggestion is, if you're thinking of starting a podcast, think of something you can do for the long term. When we do podcasts, we also realize that, once you find your niche, once you find the person you're talking to, you also want to do all you can to think about the topics that you talk about in both sides. Like that's our brand, Yah Lah BUT. So when we talk about topics like the Israel-Gaza conflict, it is so polarizing, and it's so easy to fall down the rabbit hole of just taking one side. And we realize, okay, our name is Yah Lah BUT. We need to consider both perspectives, even if it's very hard. So we talked about it, we got perspectives from one side, we spoke to someone on the ground in Palestine, and of course, a lot of people were not happy, but for us, if you want to think about any topic, the podcast platform, where you have long-form conversations, allows you to do that. So whatever topic that you all are thinking about starting for podcasting, it gives you a lot of room to go deep, wide. The thing about 2 sides to every story. This was an article that came out in 2017 when Singapore, there was a Singaporean that was featured in an ISIS video for the first time. And when we were reading the news, we realized that everything they were talking about was labeling this person as a delinquent, an ex-drug addict, someone that had failed society. But we were thinking the other side is, how can someone who grew up in Singapore like us, eats the same food, does the same hobbies, end up in ISIS? And news never covered that, which was very sad. So whenever we cover topics in the news that sometimes you see everyone talking one way, we try to consider the alternative perspective. And one thing nice about podcasts, it's harder to go have a clip be taken out of context, because no one's going to share a link and say, go to the 23rd minute and listen to this. So it's almost harder to get cancelled, which is what we enjoy a lot. It's true. It's harder to get cancelled.
It's true.
For now at least. And about knowing your strengths. So this is Terence and I when we were in university. I think if both of us ran a podcast where it was either 2 of me and 2 of him, I really don't think it would be that popular, because I would be too annoying, and 2 of us would be double the annoyance. So even in school, we were Singaporeans at an overseas university, but we never really hung out. It's only when we came back to Singapore, and then we realized we are very different, but that is what brings some appeal that we have realized to the podcast, that it is our personalities or our opposite personalities. So play to your strengths. One thing about podcasting is that, yes, people might come in for the content, but what we've realized is that they come for the content, but they actually stay for you. So when we were editing YouTube videos, it was always to get as much as you can into the first 10 seconds and don't talk about anything about us. But for podcasting, we realized that if you share more about yourself, yes, people come for the news, but you build this very intimate relationship with your listener, with the consumer of content. So even when I was planning my wedding, every week Terence would ask me, okay, on a scale of 10, how happy are you about your wedding? I'll be like, do we even need weddings? Family is causing so much problems. And I would say that on a news podcast. But that actually brought listeners in because it was relatable. When it comes to having the perfect product, Vulnerability beats perfection all the time. That's a quote supposedly by Ernest Hemingway. The first draft of anything is shit. So when we did our first podcast, we were like, okay, if you're going to think about the perfect way it looks, that will stop us. Let's just record and go. And finally, as much as podcasts are long form, you can leverage social media to amp it up by taking short extracts and putting it everywhere. You know, you've heard this thing, put it everywhere, put it everywhere. If you're creating 1 hour long pieces of content, there's so much you can milk. So, long form powered by short form. So essentially, those are a bunch of things that we've learned that which we wish we knew. So to sum up, talk to one person to appeal to many. Aim for 100 episodes. Go deep and go wide. Every story has 2 sides. Play to your strengths. Personality is key. Vulnerability eats perfection. And if you're doing long form content, there's a lot of room to use social media to get your word out. So, go forth and podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of the summit.